Alrighty, well, let's go ahead and get started. So thanks everyone for joining. This is last, at least Sitecore user group of 2022, man. The time has gone by. Being in Denver, time will actually probably slow down a bit because I'll actually be able to tell seasons, in SoCal, it's Christmas, and the next thing you know, it's Halloween and Christmas again. So today we have a few sessions, so we'll kick off with an introduction of XM Cloud. So if you guys haven't seen XM Cloud in action, go ahead.
Recording. Do you start recording?
It's recording.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So we'll walk through XM Cloud. If you were here during our last user groups, and I showed XM Cloud before, but that was the previous version of XM Cloud. We couldn't really dig in. Some features weren't available. So this is going to be the step after that. So if you haven't seen XM Cloud, we'll get into pages, components tool, which is interesting, and the Explore tool will also navigate around the portal a little bit. And then in the first section, in the first formal session, Tamas will walk us through his experience with working with Sitecore Headless, going through headless projects, the learnings that came out of that. And for the third session, we had to make a game time decision, a quick change update. So initially we had the anatomy of modern applications as the final session. Vern unfortunately got sick. He called off work today, and he was trying to make it. I was chatting with him earlier. He was trying to get some sleep and just save his voice, but looks like it got the best of him. So he will be joining us on our next Los Angeles user group. Instead, we have Martin, who will cover the new features of Sitecore 10.3, the long-awaited platform that we've been looking forward to. Some cool new things coming out of the platform, and Martin just released a blog, and he'll blog about it, and he'll cover those features towards the end of the user group. Alrighty, so why don't we jump right in? So I know, guys, how many of you seen XM Cloud before? Okay, awesome. Amir, have you seen it?
Yes, I have. Sorry about that. Yeah, I played around with the sandbox a little bit, but not too much.
Okay, excellent. So how much work have you guys done with the platform, those who have played with it? So I have the context.
Not much from me.
Yeah, basically nothing. I just saw, yeah.
I just got the access to the cloud portal. I also do have containers for the local development, and I have a big roadmap of redoing existing project, which is also headless, which is JSS 9.3 on Sitecore, and I'm going to redo that for XM Cloud. In fact, I'll do it in universal way. I was waiting for 10.3 to get released. That's why I'm so excited. And basically, I'm interested in SXA headless, which works above 10.3, so that I could make it universal way to work with Edge and be interchangeable with XM Cloud, so that XM Cloud becomes a target, a destination for it. Or maybe not, but I still will be okay.
Smart. So what I'll do is, because this session is being recorded, so other folks will be watching it later as well. So I'll start with a quick intro. We'll look at the portal. We'll start with the basics. If anyone has questions, raise your hand, interrupt. Don't wait till the very end. Let's turn this into a discussion instead of a webinar. Okay. So XM Cloud, if you haven't worked with the platform in the past, first when you try to navigate to the Sitecore Cloud portal, which is portal.sitecorecloud.io, that's the URL. Once you navigate, it'll prompt you to log in. Now, if you use your SPN login with access to Sitecore Cloud portal, if you're, for instance, working for a Sitecore partner, that will log you into Sitecore Cloud. Now, in the portal here, if there is already XM Cloud instances created, you'll see something similar to what I'm seeing here. If you're starting fresh, you'll have some CTAs for updating your profile, inviting team members, managing new projects, and we'll cover those features and functionality, how that works, and the limitations around it. So very straightforward. This is the portal that will in fact be used for additional Sitecore products as they start coming out, being added in and stitched together to appear in this new portal. So if we go into the hamburger menu here on the left, depending on your subscription.
Sorry, are you sharing the screen, or I just don't?
Thank you.
I was searching for, maybe it's hidden for me or something, but yeah.
No, thank you. Yes, I definitely should be.
Okay.
It should be. Let's see. All right. Okie doke. Tell me if you can see the screen.
Yes,
I can see it. Yeah.
All righty. Okay, so backing up slightly, once you log in, this is the portal experience that you see, right? So starting fresh, you won't see some of these tools and some of these icons here. If there's no XM Cloud or any other application created or running, depending on your subscription and the level of access you have to other Sitecore tools, you would also see them listed here when you navigate to the tool navigation menu, to the Sitecore Cloud Nav. Right, so let's say if you have Content Hub or other tools, as they start getting plugged into the Sitecore Cloud portal, you'll see them displayed here. So you can jump to individual tools right through this menu, or you can navigate through the quick actions or through the apps. One thing I do like here, and I mentioned this, I think, in the previous user group, is the list of handy links here on the right side. So you can go get to the support portal right from here. So because if you're logged in with Sitecore single sign-on, for instance, that'll log you right into the support portal. You can navigate to XM Cloud documentation. That's easy to find. Sitecore Cloud documentation in general, community forums, looking for help. Down at the bottom, Sitecore lists various types of announcements. Right. The idea is for these things to be personalized for every user who logs in to the portal. Now, once you log in here, by default, you have the ability to obviously update your profile. Pretty straightforward, speaks for itself. Then you can also invite your team members. Let's say if you're the first admin who logged into the platform, inviting team members is pretty easy. There are a couple of roles. Simply plug in their email, set them as an admin or a user, and they get access to an app. So here you can also specify again the types of apps that we can give them access to. So currently we have 2 instances of XM Cloud in this portal: Smart Bazaar and Sitecore Practice Test 3, Dev, QAT, and a Smart Bazaar. So we can specify which instance of XM Cloud we want to give them access to. And again, it's either user or admin. Okay. Once they get the invite, they click on the link, they have an account, they create the Sitecore login account, they'll be able to log in and into the portal. Now, where we start with XM Cloud is by creating projects. Okay, so project in XM Cloud is, if you can think of it as a set of environments of XM Cloud, right? So a project could be attached to an organization, to a business unit. It's basically a series of Sitecore instances, if you want to think about it that way. So let's say 1 production instance and 2 lower environments, right? Dedicated to a particular project. So here to creating projects is pretty straightforward. The first time you do it, however, the experience will be different. The first time you navigate to creating a project, it will ask you whether you want to create an empty project, an empty website when you set up the first environment, or tie it to an existing GitHub repository on the Sitecore site, to the demo site, which we'll take a look at. And then it'll also ask you for GitHub access. So to make the whole transition smoothly, if you're testing or playing around with the sandbox XM Cloud, go ahead and create the GitHub account before you get into it. What's going to happen is once it asks you for GitHub account access, once you grant that access to the Sitecore Cloud app, to the XM Cloud Deploy app, what it'll do, it'll actually use your account to fork a Sitecore's repo into your account, and then use XM Cloud Deploy that comes with XM Cloud out of the box to deploy the website by default right out of the box without having to set up the CI/CD pipeline. I think that's pretty cool. That is the feature that comes with XM Cloud out of the box. There's really nothing that we have to do except for set up the repo in GitHub. Now, you don't have to clone Sitecore's repo. That's only done if you want to have a startup demo website already available. In reality, what you would do is you would have your own repo, and with your own solution, you point XM Cloud Deploy to that repository. You can pick the branch that it listens to, and then it'll deploy when you set up a new instance, for instance. Within the project, you can set up the website right away as you set up the new environment. The cool thing is an instance setup takes about 15 minutes. Okay, so if we go into here, so we have Sitecore Practice Project, and then we have a couple of environments here. So what I can do is I'll go ahead and create a new environment. So I click Create New Environment button here at the top right corner. I'll give it a name, LA SUG PRD Production. So by default, within the Sitecore sandbox, and for those subscribing to XM Cloud, this will depend on the type of license that you have. But for the sandbox, you're limited to having 2 projects. Each project is limited to having up to 3 environments: 1 production, 2 non-production environments. Now, because we already have 2 environments here, what it's doing is basically highlighting the fact that I've exceeded the limit for non-production environments. So here I'll go ahead and create a production environment. As you can see here, it's asking me whether I want to link it to an existing branch. If I choose the main branch, what that would do is it would deploy the code from that branch into that new environment right away as it sets it up. Okay, and then we can choose whether we want the XM Cloud Deploy automatically push our updates on commits to that branch or not. So this is pretty handy. So what this does essentially, it sets up a CI/CD pipe for our code to be deployed into the XM Cloud environment. Okay, so there are some checks that do run on the code that gets deployed to XM Cloud to make sure nothing bad or malicious gets deployed into the Sitecore Cloud environment. So there's some checks and balances that are running behind the scenes. So Sitecore won't let you deploy certain things, for instance. But once it's deployed enough, it takes only 15 minutes for this whole thing to complete. Let me go ahead and actually set it to no. I'll go ahead and start the creation process. So going back to the cloud deploy. So here, what we also have in the XM Cloud Deploy is an option for authentication clients. This cloud portal uses APIs that call XM Cloud for certain things. So all the things that we can do, well, a lot of things that we can do here in the portal, we can also do remotely. So if we have our DevOps tools configured internally at an organization, or have our own tools of choice for administering instances, systems, and so forth, we can do is create a token here and plug that token, share that token with our sysadmin folks, with our IT, and they can use that token to now call APIs on XM Cloud to control environments. So they can do the same thing that I just did here, create a new project, create a new environment, for instance, decommission, and so forth. So that all of that, all those things can be orchestrated remotely, Sitecore CLI. All righty, so here, as we can see, the LA SUG prod environment is building. Let's take another time. So it's 20 minutes in. We'll continue, and then we'll get back to it in a little bit and see what the status is. So the status navigation provides a quick overview of the XM Cloud Deploy in general, right? So how builds are moving. It's pretty basic, but it's helpful, right? So it gives us an idea if something went wrong with the deployment, we can log in and quickly check if there's an issue with XM Cloud Deploy currently, similar to the status check that we have on the cloud platforms, right? On the SaaS. So that's XM Cloud Deploy. So currently supports GitHub out of the box. There are plans to support DevOps, right? GitLab, and I think Bitbucket was also there. But recently only heard about DevOps and GitLab as with DevOps being the higher priority to be supported. Now there is a way to come up, create our own custom DevOps pipes, right? CI/CD pipelines without having to use XM Cloud Deploy. So XM Cloud Deploy would be an easy, quick start CI/CD pipe for those interested in just simply deploying the code in the easiest way. However, if of course you have complex requirements, custom requirements for the CI/CD pipeline, if you want to include gates, other checks, quality code checks, scans, security, static, dynamic performance, and so forth, right? Load tests, all of those things would require a custom pipeline. And in that case, we'll then use Sitecore CLI to, again, communicate with the XM Cloud using one of the authentication client tokens that we created here. Okay. So pretty straightforward. In fact, so with all of that, right, the Sitecore CLI, the command line interface, is something that if you're not on, you may want to start thinking about or playing around with or learning if you're planning to go to XM Cloud. Okay, so let's go back to our dev instance. So dev instance is one of the first instances that I've built here, and what I've done is I took advantage of Sitecore's demo repository, forked that into my GitHub, and that was deployed to the website. So in the next about, let's say, maybe 10 minutes, I'll go over by a few minutes here by the planned time. Now, what I'll do is I'll go through the Pages tool. I'll show you some of the things that we haven't seen before, or I wasn't able to show in the tool in the previous Los Angeles user group because of limited release, the preview release that we had access to. Now that XM Cloud is released, we now have access to personalized functionality. We have access to the analytics. We have access to new tools like components, for instance. So we'll take a look, which I'm pretty excited about. If you haven't seen Jason Sincere's video on Sitecore XM Cloud components, do check it out. Very interesting, super cool. Makes you think differently about composable, and it's sort of eye-opening. And I'll touch on that briefly here in a little bit. So what you see here is Pages, and Martin may also mention Horizon in his part of the user group. Horizon is the foundation for Sitecore Pages, right? So we've known about Horizon for quite a while. It's gone through multiple tech releases. Several companies actually use it with Sitecore XP already. But what's happened is Sitecore has deprecated Horizon, starting with version 10.3 for the XP platform, and now is serving as the foundation or the new face of Sitecore XM Cloud. So this tool is now called Sitecore Pages. So it's fully based on what we used to know, Sitecore Horizon. So if you work with Horizon, this interface will look familiar, right? So one of the things that you can see right away, if this is your first time working with it, is the animation, the level of detail that was given to the animations inside of the tool. It gives me personally, and I'm a stickler for those things, the sense of an Apple-like experience. Now, before you jump off, obviously the UI itself doesn't use the Apple style guide. It gives you the feeling, the similar feeling that you get from working with Apple products. It's just the animation, it's just the attention to detail. It's just simply, like I said last time, it's a nice place to be. It's pleasant to work with a platform. It's snappy where it needs to be snappy, but it's also well animated with transitions and things like that. So here in the Pages, we can switch between websites. So Sitecore instances, XM Cloud instances still support multiple websites. If you notice, when I first loaded it, it loaded one of our demo test sites. So as you can see, multiple people are playing around with this instance, developing on it, building on it. Here, Play website is the demo website that I personally deployed to this instance. We're still working with multiple sites in XM Cloud. So again, you have projects. Projects can have multiple environments, up to 3 in the sandbox. Depends on your license. If you're a subscriber, inside of each environment, we can still have multiple websites. Okay, license for XM Cloud carries similar terms with subscription. Cost model has been simplified dramatically. I think it's all about traffic now. Mostly, for the most part, it's all about traffic. And the subscription license is the only type of license available, as opposed to XP, where there's, perpetual licenses aren't sold, but they're still found in the space. With XM Cloud, we're only looking at subscription. With subscription, we have unlimited domains, I believe. That's how that goes. I'll have to check myself. I have a list of the license descriptions offline. So here we have similar type of functionality, access to similar type of functionality as we have in Horizon. So we can change our language, we can switch websites, we can open the preview of the website to see without the Chrome of the pages, right? What that would look like, speaks for itself. We can view it across different devices, mobile, tablet, and desktop, different form factors. Here on the left side, in the pages section, we have our familiar content tree structure, right? So this is similar to content editor. Allows us to navigate the tree, makes it a lot easier than Experience Explorer. In fact, what Sitecore did in general with Horizon and continuing to do with Pages is optimize the entire experience of authoring. If you've been in the Sitecore space for a while, you know the Experience Editor or the Experience Explorer. Those tools haven't been updated in the Sitecore space, gosh, for ages, right? For over a decade. It's the same inline editing tool. It's the same WYSIWYG that we've used for over 10, 12 years without any changes really to it, major changes. So the Pages on the Horizon tool is an overhaul of that experience that focuses on efficiency and productivity. They literally focused on reducing the number of clicks to perform a single task, right? They optimize the way certain things are done. For instance, you no longer have to click Save button to save your changes. Those are saved automatically. So everything from larger usability enhancers to smaller things like that overall makes a huge difference in the experience that you'll see in Sitecore Pages. Okay, so we still have the drag and drop functionality here, just like in Horizon. So if we go to the components here, by default, when you set up an empty site, you're going to get the default SXA headless library of components, and that comes with just a handful. In fact, you can tell which ones come by default because they're black and white. The ones that were built specifically for the demo have colored icons. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8 components currently that come with XM Cloud out of the box. Image, link list, navigation. Oh, I'm sorry. Image, link list, navigation, page content, promo, rich text, title, and container. Okay, everything else, all the other components with colored icons were built for this demo. So we still have the drag and drop functionality. So updating this just as simple as simply dragging the component in. So if you work with SXA, similar functionality, same thing as Horizon, for instance, right? We can move things up and down. We can grab a component, drag it around the screen. That's usability enhancer. On the right, depending on if we're talking about components outside of the default set, we would get a custom list of features that are enabled by developers. By default, what we'll be looking at is a similar set of features that we have with SXA. Right? So we still have component variants. We still have some of those, some of the flexibility that we're used to with SXA in the headless version. Again, this is based on Next.js. Okay. On the left side, so if we miss our good old form-based editor, we can switch over to the content side of the pages. This is similar to the content editor, where we can use the form-based editing tool to update our content. Makes it easier in some cases, makes it faster if we have to work with a lot of content and some advanced features. However, do try to stay with the components tool. In fact, in my Udemy course on content authoring Sitecore 10, I go through putting together a landing page using a form-based content authoring tool and a WYSIWYG, so experience editor for that version of Sitecore. And it took half the steps to do that in the WYSIWYG. So what that translates into is literally half the effort, half the time to do the same updates. So do stay with the components tool. So here are a couple of things that we didn't have access to when we initially did the demo of XM Cloud. Personalize. So Sitecore has changed the way it's doing personalization. Out of the box, we have a limited set of rules available to us. It's primarily rules based on session. However, there are some rules based on historical data. Now, underneath this all, we have Sitecore Personalize powering the personalization and the CDP powering historical data and the analytics data store. Right, so these tools are already plugged in. So when we enable, the idea is when we enable, let's say, Sitecore Personalize or activate the Sitecore Personalize license, the set of tools would expand, the functionality would expand in the cloud portal, right, seamlessly. The way personalization works in XM Cloud is also different, where in Sitecore XP or in XM with session-based personalization, what we would do is we would personalize each individual component, and personalization would run at a component level. Here in XM Cloud, what we do is we create a page variant. Okay, so first we create a page variant, and then we define the audience that would be exposed to that page variant. And so initially, it takes nothing more than just simply giving it a name. Once we start configuring the audience, this is where we see the default set of rules. So here on the right side, you see the rules that are available with Sitecore XM Cloud. I believe it's a set of about 20 rules. As you can see, a lot of them have to do with the current session, for instance, the country you're coming from, day of the week, the refer, UTM values, operating system, the device you're currently using. However, this is an example of a history-based rule, number of page views. The visitor has visited pages within the past X days. And I think, if I remember correctly, 30 is the limit on the historical data for this specific rule. So we can add a rule, specify the device, for instance, save that, and what that would do, you would add a page variant here. And now that we specified the audience, now we can start customizing components on that page variant. So you can see components now have this little yellow highlight frame, and it tells you whether the component has been personalized or not. So if we want to personalize, let's say, the hero component, we'll click on that icon, and now we're back to a similar familiar experience where we can specify the data source item, which is our content item, or we can choose a different component to display the same content. So this is personalizing content, personalizing presentation layer, right? Or you can simply choose to hide the component, for instance, right? So if I click that, component goes away, and this is the experience that we're exposed to. So relatively straightforward. Sitecore says those types of rules are the most used rules, in personalization. If we start thinking about omni-channel support, or if we want to go deeper into historical data personalization, that's when you start looking at tools like Sitecore Personalize and acquiring the Sitecore CDP. Now, the other tool here is Sitecore Analyze. This is the tool that we didn't have access to in the past. What that is the tool that gives us analytics. Here we have a empty demo website. So there's not a lot of data here. This is a most brand new demo implementation, but you can see what type of data would come in here once traffic starts flowing. So we'll be able to see the browsers, the operating system, the source, where they came from, the pages, the first page, the entry page, top pages visited, top countries by source, visits by time of the day. This is the heat map that would display darker rectangles for the time of the day with the most traffic. And then here we have the basic visitors, average time on site visits, and bounce rate. So the basic analytics we would expect to have on the platform. What's interesting, what's also being currently built out is the page level analytics. Now, you can probably say, well, wait a minute. Well, Horizon already had page-based analytics. Well, This analytics system is now built on top of the Sitecore CDP, and that's the big difference, right? So the Horizon, as we knew it, pulled its analytics, page level analytics, from the XDB. There is no more XDB with Sitecore XM Cloud. And so all this data is coming from Sitecore CDP. So Sitecore was nice enough to post a little short video here, which basically covers the experience that will be released soon for page level analytics. As you can see, so here's a heat map, views, and similar types of analytics that we can expect for the site. Okay. So I'm running slightly over here. What I do want to show you guys is the new tool before we move on to the next section. That's called components. It's a pretty exciting tool, I think. Although it's in its early stages, really early stages, the tool has already a lot of potential. And ultimately, the idea behind the tool is to allow content authors and marketers to build components without having to bring in a developer, okay, from scratch. And so if you ever used Dreamweaver back in the day, this is relatively similar idea, right? So the idea is for us to be able to put components together, piece them together from page elements, images, links, and so forth. Okay, so for instance, if I click on one of the demo components here, so here you can see there's what I did is I just put an image on the right side, I put some content on the left side. By default, when you start off, let me actually go ahead and exit. When you add a new component, just keep the default collection. You can create collections of components here. LA SUG. You end up with an empty canvas. You're starting from scratch, right? There we go. So you can add multiple versions of the component. Once you start creating a component, you can start with a grid, and then you simply start adding. Let's say if I want to add a 2-column layout, there's pretty decent flexibility, right? So we can fine tune exactly what kind of width that we want. Let's say the number of columns, the horizontal alignment, right? Let's say justify center, right? Okay, there we go. Let's look at some of the other components here. So we can add, let's see here. Hold on a second. Okay. Okay. Add element. There we go. That's what I was looking for. I was missing the button. So we can add multiple elements to the component. So you can play around with it. So there's some basic functionality available in the component tool that we can create some basic components. The tool will get built out, and as it gets built out, right, the flexibility will continue to grow. So we can do some basic things, add images, specify the layouts, the grids, number of columns, buttons, links, text, and so forth. If you're handy with HTML, you can do a custom component implementation. Now, what's really impressive here, outside of the fact that we can now build components ourselves without developers, is the data sources section. We can add a custom data source to pull content from any other data source, as long as it can give us JSON back, content in the form of JSON. We can accept that, and we can populate our components that we created in this component tool with content from that external system. Now that's pretty powerful and impressive. So if those of you guys that do have access to XM Cloud, do play around with this. Very impressive. If you haven't seen this in action, check out Jason Sincere's video about components, where he covers connecting Contentful and pulling content from Contentful into a component that he had created in Sitecore components. Pretty powerful, right? So let me go ahead and delete this component. So we can specify custom types, custom fonts. There's quite a bit of styling functionality here. And the idea, once we have the component and create the component here, we publish it, and that component now becomes available in Sitecore pages in the component library. All right, so now we're not only talking about creating individual component customizations, what we're used to with SXA. Now we can create entire components from scratch, completely from scratch. We can style them. We can pull data from an external data source. Additionally, if I go back here into this component, if I remember right, let's see here. If I go to get embed code, this tool gives me access to React code, JavaScript code to include in my code solution if I wanted to. Check it out. So there's code for JavaScript, and there's a web component code, right? So now we can grab this code, we can drop it into React code and use it that way as well. So as you can see, super flexible, can be used by content authors, can be used by developers. Integrating an external data source, let's say Contentful or Content Hub, for instance. If you're storing data in Content Hub, plug that in, ping the JSON endpoint, get the content, and plug that into the component. And because we're now working with Jamstack, these things will be generated statically. The pages will be generated statically and deployed out of our cell. So super exciting, very, very interesting. I'm still playing around with this component, trying to push its limitations, trying to see what are all the things that we can and cannot do. So if you haven't yet, I do urge you to play around with it. Perhaps one of the most powerful features of XM Cloud. Alrighty, so spent quite a bit of time. So we covered Sitecore pages, Sitecore components. There's a new tool that's available on Sitecore XM Cloud, and it's called Explore, and that's the tool that lets you manipulate content without, a useful tool for those who need to manipulate content but don't necessarily need to have access to the way it's presented. It provides an easy, usable interface to control content, modify, copy, and upload and download media assets. Okay, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here in the interest of time. What I do want to do is let me go back to Sitecore Cloud portal. Now we should have our LA SUG production instance ready, and there it is. So that's the instance that I started creating. As you can see, LA SUG PRD. That's the instance that was created from scratch during the presentation. As you can see, we have our content. If you remember, I used the pre-configured GitHub repository to deploy to that instance. And if we go into our managed projects, let me see if it will give us the timestamp here, because it's been more than 25 minutes since we began, since I started the deployment. But you can see, let's see, let me take a look at the deployment logs. There you go. In fact, you can see, so complete provisioning, build, post action. So about 15 minutes. Yeah, 15, maybe 15, 17 minutes, 15, 16 minutes here. We have our, oh, wait, hold on. Deployment completed 13 minutes. There we go. There we go. Did the math for me. All right. Any questions, guys, on what you saw, or any questions from your personal experience? Amir, Martin?
No, that's great. Thank you.
All right. Awesome. Well, Tamas, at this stage, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you to tell us what headless projects really look like and what we should be keeping an eye on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I will share my screen. So I hope you can see my screen. Yeah, in this session, I will talk a bit about our experiences from the last, basically from the last year, we started our first Sitecore Headless project, and I just want to share how we did it, what were the outcomes, and how we solved the problems we have faced. So just a bit about me. I am Tamás Tárnok, based in Hungary, Budapest, where last year, or actually this year, was the SubCon Europe. And here's my Twitter account, and I am also blogging from time to time. And I am a 5-time awarded Sitecore Technology MVP. So yes, that's about me. Let's just look at the agenda. So in the first few minutes, we just have a look on the headless CMS architecture. What's the difference between the traditional CMS and the headless? Just a short recap, and then I will talk about the backend of the headless, which is basically the Sitecore Headless Services, which is deployed to a Sitecore XM or XP environment, or this is actually basically also used in the XM Cloud environment. And on the next step is to have a look at the Sitecore Next.js SDK, what we have in that, and this is basically the explanation of the client side of our headless project, and then I will tell the story about our project from start until the end. I will talk about technical challenges, development process changes, development team setup, and things like that. So let's just have a short look on the architecture of the headless CMS in general. So on the left side, you are seeing the traditional CMS, which is basically requires to run a CMS to also run inside your website. So like with Sitecore XP, that whenever you want to spin up a new content delivery server or content management server, you would need always the Sitecore as a frame or a base, and then on top of that you deploy your own code. And the main difference here is that in the headless CMS, basically the head is separated. So the body is basically the content which is served to the consumer applications through web APIs, and the head part is the Next.js application, where you don't need any Sitecore environment running. That was actually, in our case, it was running in an Azure app service, which was a Linux-based app service. And basically here you have the Sitecore Next.js SDK, which is helping and accelerating the development on the front end. So that was the short recap. So let's talk about the Sitecore Headless Services, which is basically the backend part of the headless solutions. Just drink. So actually the layout service is out there since the first version of the Sitecore GSS. It was maybe released 4 years ago, so it's not that new. But this is basically an API which is giving you back the presentation details of a page with all the placeholders, content, and the positions of the components on the page in a JSON format. So that's the big difference, of course, because JSON is processable by basically any program language which can handle web connections. So here is the layout service, how it looks like. And this is just a sample response. So here we have on the top the context, which is some kind of global data. For example, you can see some basic data which is given by Sitecore, so which site we are in, what's the item path, language, and user if you are logged into Sitecore. And the next part is the root. Root is basically equals to a page. So this is a related data for the page. And here you have a lot of data: layout ID, template ID of the page item, and most important part is the placeholders property, which is describing the page layout. So, for example, here we have in the JSS main placeholder, we have a component called default layout, and inside we have two other placeholders. One is the JSS header, which contains a header, and the other one is the JSS content, which is now just containing a text component. These are arrays, of course, so you can have multiple components inside one placeholder. So this layout service is actually is running a bunch of content resolvers. You can imagine content resolvers from the Sitecore MVC world, like these are the controllers. So this is providing the content fields with the values for one specific component inside the placeholder. And Sitecore comes, when you install the Sitecore Headless services, comes with some built-in resolvers. Here are so the context item children resolver, context item resolver, and the same for the data source, and the Sitecore forms resolver and the folder filter resolver. So this is, I think, a generic infrastructure when you're building a Sitecore headless project with Next.js. So of course we have one database server, and we have a Sitecore CM most of the time, and a separated CD server. And of course we have some other roles, but this is not really important now. And for each role, we actually have the same replication of the Next.js application. So theoretically, we could also have one Next.js application, which is connected to the Sitecore CM and or the Sitecore CD. But I wouldn't recommend this, because with this one, we have a clear separation between the environments, and usually you want to protect some functionality on the CM server, also on the Next.js application. So, and let's talk a bit about the Next.js SDK. So what is Next.js? Is the React framework for production. This was set by the company who is actually maintaining the Next.js, by Verza. And what I want to emphasize here is what kind of rendering methods it supports. So this is the method which is actually responsible for how the HTML is shown on a website in your browser. So the first one is the server-side rendering. This means basically the HTML is generated on the server side. The next one is the static site generation. Is when the site is generated by a build or a content update trigger or webhook. Then it regenerates the HTML files and stores it in a file storage, basically, and then it then just should serve the files and shouldn't do any server-side functions in it. The next one is the client-side rendering. In this case, the client side, so the browser is rendering out the JSON response and converting it to HTML basically. And the next one is the incremental static generation, is similar to the static site generation. And I'm not pretty sure what's the difference, but I believe it's just regenerating the sites which has been updated, or the pages. So what we have in the SDK, so we have the component factory, which is basically a registry for all the components which we are implementing, like a text component, image component, and header navigation, and things like that. And the next one is the placeholder resolver. This is responsible to resolve the layout and the placeholders in it. And this works together with the component factory. So the placeholder resolver is rendering out also the components to the correct placeholder. The next one is the field helper component, which is helping the developers to render image components or links or rich text inside the Next.js project. The next one is, of course, the layout, service fetching, and mapping. So the SDK does basically the connection between our Sitecore instance, the layout service, and the Next.js application, and it's mapping the response to TypeScript objects. So here we also have, of course, multi-language support. And it has to be set up a bit differently than in Sitecore. So we also had to set up the new language in Sitecore if we want to add one, and we also do some configuration on the Next.js application. And it comes, of course, with the Sitecore Analytics and Experience Editor support. And this was really helping us, the disconnected mode. This is basically a mocking framework provided by Sitecore. Basically, instead of using a Sitecore layout service and real databases, secure databases, it allows you to create content and pages in the file system in the YAML format, so the developers front-end developers can create their own pages and components with the content, and they can use that, and without any code change, this can be easily switched to the Sitecore connection, and then it will work on the same way if the templates are matched and the field names, of course. So let's dive into the story of our first Sitecore headless project. So let me just start with the project features and requirements. So the first one is actually we had a pretty short time frame to finish and release and go through the whole process of the project in 7-8 months. Fortunately, they already had an existing Sitecore 10.1 site in place, or actually that was also in progress. And yes, and we introduced this headless technology for the client. So the client also had some technical people where we also had to consult about architecture decisions and things like that. And a little bit about the domain of the project. It was development of a booking system. It was more like a single page like than a static site. So it was not a real, or let's say a traditional CMS. So it was more like a business application. And we also had to integrate a lot of external services. I will also tell more about it. For example, booking, payment, and product informations, and more. So how we started the team. We had 2 senior front-end developers. This was also their first Sitecore project, so they were familiar with React and Next.js a bit, but they were all senior. And 1 senior Node.js developer. It was not really related to the Sitecore, but to the project. So I mentioned the third-party services. We created, or actually he developed some wrapper APIs around the other lot of APIs to connect them together. And 2 senior Sitecore developer was on the project. It was also their first headless project, and I was one of them. And yeah. And we had 1 tech lead. He was mainly focusing on infrastructure and DevOps tasks. So you can see we had quite a small team, but with pretty good experience. So if you can do, I would suggest the same, because I think with the seniority of these developers, we could deliver the project in time and in quality. But there were a lot of communication between and decisions we had to make with quite a high risk, because the technology was new for us. So the project in it is basically the discovery phase of the project. It was running, I think, around for 6 weeks, and by this we were discovering the requirements, and it turned out that this is an SPA and a business application, so the layout and the content won't really change too much. So basically every page was almost unique, and we couldn't really reuse too many components, except of course the header and footer and the frame of the pages. But most of them were quite unique because of, listing products, payment screen, checkout screen, basket, and things like that. So yes, so with this, the functionality of the front end was higher than the editing experience, and with the short time frame, we had to cut the scope a bit, and we cut on the editing experience. What we did is basically developed a big chunk of components and not small granular components. So we could avoid having editorial errors, basically. But of course, it was not that flexible. But this could be split into smaller components at a later point. So the 0 sprint was the Sitecore upgrade, because as I mentioned in the beginning, we wanted to use the Next.js SDK, but Next.js is supported since Sitecore 10.2. And first we had to do the upgrade. And a bit about the development process and how we work together. So basically we had 3 teams. We had the front end, the Node.js developer or team, and the Sitecore team. And the front end was actually depending on each of the teams, because the front end was the one who bound everything together and showed everything from different sources on one page. So to resolve this, we used mocks wherever we could. So we use mocks for API calls. It was quite easy to set up in Next.js. It's really easy to mock APIs and create API endpoints. And in these mocks, we had to agree on of course, on the schema of the API responses. And we used Open API specification for that. And of course, we also did Sitecore YAML mocks. So, for example, Sitecore developers were also playing a lot around the YAML mocks to support the front-end devs. And we also had to decide which rendering method we want to use. And we used the server-side rendering. The main reason was that we had to do a lot of logic in the background and also on the server side of the node. This is not really ideal, but for this case, I would say this was the good choice. So in the next 6 sprint, we actually did the build of the features, and this is how we work together. So the front-end development and the back-end and the Sitecore development was happening in parallel. And as I mentioned, the communication was a key part of it with the contracts between all the parties. And at the end of the 6th sprint, we could only start binding the features together. So we had to build quite a few complex features on the backend and also the front end, and that's why we couldn't just do it in after each other, because then the other one team would just sitting on the bench. So we bound the features together, we deployed, and most of the stories at this time went to QA and then UAT. Until this point, we of course did the sprint reviews and the demos for the client, but we just simply didn't pass yet any story yet because all of the parts should be bound together to do that. So in this critical sprint, we deployed the main features to actually able to book a product and run through the whole journey of a payment and the checkout. And yeah, so this time actually started the QA team, and then this happened. So we always hit by the QA for a few sprints, but this was kind of expected because what we have been done was just doing developer tests, and some edge cases were not covered. So the last few sprints, after everything went fine, we got the performance and penetration testing by an external company, and we also had to do some fixes here. What we did, so I mentioned that we had a lot of external APIs we had to connect to, and these APIs, basically we couldn't touch them. We just had to accept how they are working, and therefore most of them were pretty slow. So when I mean slow, originally a login was taking 15 seconds and we just couldn't do anything because we had to ask different systems about the user, and at the end we could make it parallel, so we could reduce to around 5 seconds, but that's still quite a lot in case of login. And also the other APIs were pretty slow. So what we did is actually caching every response with a short TTL. We used 5 minutes and we cached in Redis. And it was pretty easy to set up this caching with Redis. We used the Node Redis package. on the server side. Yes, a bit more about the infrastructure. So on the right side, we have the Sitecore. This is just a simplified diagram of the Sitecore environment, which was also connected to Content Hub. And here you can see the Sitecore CM is connected to the CM app service, and we have the content delivery, which is connected to the CD app service. And inside this resource group, we had the Redis cache for the Next.js application. And yes, so why we need a connection between the CM and the application is that to support the experience editor, basically. Because what happens here is Sitecore is basically doing a post request to this application, to a specific endpoint, and then it's responding back with the HTML response, which is already containing the extra HTML for the experience editor. And in this way, we can edit the same way the components as in a Sitecore MVC project. And this whole environment or the Next.js application was running through a Cloudflare for the user, and we also had GTM. And what is hidden here is basically a huge diagram. Underneath this is the connection to all of the third-party APIs. So just a short summary at the end, what learnings we had. So the implementation is definitely was faster in this case, that the front end could basically work with the framework he likes and not bound to Sitecore MVC and Razor views and things like that. So it was pretty fast using also the disconnected mode to build out. Actually, in one sprint, we could already show something to the client with some basic components. Yes, so I mentioned we used mostly content resolvers, but GraphQL could be a good option as well, because it's then more also more compatible with XM Cloud. So because on the edge only GraphQL can be used. And we are already planning to use it on other projects. We are still discovering the good use case for it. And yeah, what is also important is the effective communication between the Sitecore and the front-end teams, because as a Sitecore developer with a lot of experience, you know how Sitecore works and what the client would expect, for example, in Experience Editor. But the front-end teams who never worked with Sitecore yet, they don't know. So you have to teach them and also train them a bit. And I think it's vice versa. So the front-end team is also, for me, it was explaining a lot of stuff. So at the end, I could also do some implementation on the front end when I had some free time. And yeah, the experience editor support to set this up and configure was not that easy because every functionality which we developed was behind the login, and most of the information was related to the booking of the actual logged in user. So to do this and make it editable in Sitecore Experience Editor, we had to basically bypass the authentication and use mocks for the API responses in the Experience Editor, so that we could also with this solution we could also basically implement some Experience Editor features, which is only running in Experience Editor, because we could switch between the two modes. Yes, and thank you very much. That was my presentation. Do you have any question? I am happy to answer now, or you can find me on Sitecore Slack or on Twitter.
Yeah, the question. Is my mic working well?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So there are two questions, generic and specific. Generic is, were you personally involved in the coding of Next.js components at some stage? I know that mostly no, but at some stage. And the another question is that, what would you probably name as the three biggest challenges, like difficulties that was hard to approach rather than overcome, like from understanding point of view?
Yeah. So I started to be involved in the project from the beginning, and with the teaching of our front-end team, I could understand pretty easily the React components after a few weeks. And then I was always assigned to pull requests, so I was always seeing the changes there and learn a lot from them. And yeah, so basically after a few weeks, I could implement some stuff in the Next.js application. To be honest, I was mostly doing server-side also on the Next.js application, but it was still fun to do some TypeScript and Node.js related stuff. And the biggest challenges, I think the first one was really this Experience Editor issue. So it's always an issue, I think, when some functionality is behind authentication and requires some booking ID or whatever to get extra info from other systems or from Sitecore based on that. So that was one, because this was extra time, of course. And what else? Not particularly with the headless. So with Sitecore Headless, I don't think anything is harder than the Sitecore MVC. It's more like the nature of the headless project. You have to get used to that the front end is separated. You don't have in the layout service user information or anything, so you can't do that much in the content resolvers. And you have to approach things differently also in Sitecore a bit. So I think these are.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so now the chat. Sorry, I was not watching it while the presentation.
Looks like Praful's asking, FAD is a front-end developer?
Yes, yeah. So the front-end developer, yes, we had an introduction to Sitecore Headless. Of course, I think the developer has to understand how page and components build up. So what are the placeholders, what is the layout, and what are the components? And then after that, he could create the mocks in disconnected mode to build up a page. And from that, it was enough. And of course, the SDK, he has to use the field helpers from Sitecore to support the Experience Editor. Thank you for the question.
I have one question. So in terms of Sitecore upgrade, right now we are on Sitecore 9.3 MVC model. So when we are upgrading to Sitecore 10x, is that really we need to go to headless architecture? Because I think it's kind of a big switch from MVC to going to Next.js from technical standpoint as well. So what is the plan? Can we just go with the regular Sitecore 10x MVC model, or we first must must go to the headless approach?
Yeah, you can go with the MVC approach to Sitecore 10.3. So MVC, I think, will be there until the product is there. I have this feeling right now. So it's not a must to move to the headless. I think it really depends on the client. So if the client has an ongoing development, I don't know, basically an ongoing development for years, then I think it would make sense to switch some point to headless, because the developer world is going into that direction, and it just makes the development faster, I think. But it's not a must. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would also add, it's a good point. It's accurate. If you guys are thinking in terms of the SaaS roadmap, that's where you got to start thinking headless. XM Cloud only supports headless. Well, while XP, as the DXP, the Sitecore XP platform, supports both modes, right? Headless, legacy, MVC, web forms, even, XLT is still there. With XM Cloud, we can only take the headless approach. So if that's somewhere on the roadmap, that's something to keep in mind. You can either rebuild the whole thing, overhaul it from MVC to headless in one go, or you can gradually go through the rebuild, as granular as page by page if you really wanted to.
I can expect that companies with time will start more and more thinking about XM Cloud because of the operational simplicity and cost. And you will eventually come to the headless. You will have to do Edge. You will have to do a GraphQL against Edge. So that's everything Tamas just has explained about. So, and in that case, I see you may still use 10.3 platform, which was released just today. I will speak about it briefly in a minute. And you can use it as, let's say, a jumping point. So nothing stops you from setting up just local XM instance without any XP, without anything. And you can start doing headless implementation against that XP instance. You can employ Edge. So you can apply some composable things which you want to do, maybe some search functionality, because there's no one in XM Cloud available out of the box. You have to compose your search for your project, and that will drastically simplify your upgrade path to the SaaS world of XM Cloud.
Okay, got it. That was just question because being an insurance client, right? Some insurance client don't want to go for SaaS model. Just want to be on the. They just want to have more control on the data. So just considering that, like it's a regular 10 MVC model would be sufficient or not? Yeah.
The problem here with insurance, sorry, Vasiliy, like most insurance companies I used to work for, they still use external services for pulling up the data. They employ enterprise service buses to do that. So all that's still valid with XM Cloud.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Martin, is there a way to turn the mic sensitivity up a little bit? You sound clear, but it's just a little too.
I just switched microphone. I'll do that.
Oh, there we go. Okay, awesome.
How that works for me.
Perfect.
Better.
Yeah, that sounds a lot better. There's nothing wrong at all with staying on MVC. There are benefits to moving to headless. I mean, there's a reason why the industry is moving towards it. But there's absolutely nothing wrong staying with MVC. There's headless could, in fact, Sitecore has rendering hosts. So if you're on MVC, if you wanted to have a headless architecture, you can actually serve your MVC solution through a headless architecture using the Sitecore rendering host. So that is also an option. It's not proper headless, but it'll allow you to generate, take a headless approach for the MVC implementation. There are some, cons and pros there, but there's definitely nothing wrong with staying with MVC.
Okay. Yeah, got it. Yeah, got it. Thanks.
the bare minimum version of Sitecore platform to make it work, as what Vasiliy just said, is 10.2. So from 10.2 you can do that.
Okay, sure, got it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, Tamas, thank you so much. I think headless is really, I mean, if I were to start a new project, it'd be headless, right? It's just, there's, you know, for new builds, and this is what we do too. It's all new builds are headless by default moving forward. It's just, you know, the way of the future.
Exactly.
So many benefits to it. Once you try, if you're familiar with the MVC implementation, the first time you try to do it with headless, your mind gets slightly blown by how much easier things are and faster in many ways to build. Because there's no backend logic for a lot of things for data access. It just comes free with layout service or GraphQL or whatnot. So it's simple things like basic components. They're a breeze. So it's very interesting. Very interesting. So Tamas, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
It's
Thank you.
good to see how you guys powered through it. Martin, at this stage, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you for Sitecore 10.3.
Right, so that was a very last minute change, so I don't have any slides. The only thing that I do have is I have written a blog, and the post is available from my blog or from my company's blog, Proficient. You may just search it. So what happened is, as soon as 10 hours ago, Sitecore has released the version 10.3. Probably after more than a year of hard work, they didn't do anything, but now they released it. And they released 10.3 of XM and XP platforms. I am highlighting that because Experience Commerce has been discontinued. So after version 10.2, there won't be any XE releases anymore. So let's think what we have in 10.3 so far. The biggest, probably in my opinion, is Headless SXA. So Headless SXA became a first-class citizen for XM Cloud already, as Vasiliy just mentioned. And now we got Headless SXA with 10.3. So we also have Next.js Headless SXA components. Those I can recall is column splitter, container, image, linked list, navigation, page content, partial design, dynamic placeholder, rich text. So something like these basics, very little of them, but they're basic. The whole idea is that with SXA, you can do rendering variants that are bigger strengths of these module, so you can always create your own components and derive them from existing one. That's what we typically did while working with SXA. And in my opinion, SXA development team, they made an incredible job aiming to achieve some sort of feature parity for their product between XM Cloud and XM XP platforms. So basically, they wanted to have that same that same SXA headless that will be similar for both of them. So because of that, they unfortunately had to retire some features, something that do not fall nicely into new concept. And that's the reason why Headless SXA does not include Creative Exchange any longer, which really served the good work for many of us. So similar is valid for forms. You will not be able to use forms with SXA Headless, at least for the moment, out of the box. There is, however, documentation how you can use the forms with Next.js, and you can also consider a dedicated forms builder or any composable solution. So you can go composable with that. Later on the roadmap, from what I learned, is that Sitecore expect to move their forms into another composable solution as a part of their family, so that it will be integrated together with everything. And the reason for that is quite simple. In order to work with XM Cloud, forms need to submit their data somewhere, but XM Cloud works with Edge, and Edge is just, you cannot submit your data to Edge. So they need to invent some server service where they will be start submitting the data and wrap it into a product that will be composable to us. But anyway, that's not a big problem at the moment. You may also leverage Next.js as XA starter template. You can install the one with npx, and I have the instruction in my blog how to do that. So in general, if you're planning new implementation today, and if you feel positive about using SXA, my best advice would be to go and download 10.3 and use the new headless SXA with it. You will benefit from everything two previous speakers have told you, and lots of other perks. And basically that immediately brings you into the headless world of 2023. And it drastically simplifies the further upgrade options, and not to mention the potential migration to XM Cloud. Another new feature of 10.3 I would name webhooks. So, you know, like other Sitecore SaaS products, they already use webhooks, at least XM Cloud does, Content Hub does, Order Cloud does. So with new introduction of XM and XP platforms, they also use it. But firstly, some of you may ask, what are webhooks in principle? So webhook is just a HTTP request, which is triggered by some event on a source system, which being sent to any destination you specify. And of course, it's carrying some useful payload of data, which is described in the specification, so that the recipient can make use of that. These webhooks are automatically sent out when the event is fired at the source system. So basically, there are some sort of user-defined HTTP callbacks that are triggered by specific events. So per documentation, we are given 3 types of webhooks, which are event handler, submit action, and validation action. So that is a good example of webhook. You may be validating and even canceling workflow transitions by using them. So what else? GraphQL authoring and management API. Similar to what XM Cloud features, another great feature is that authoring and management API. So that API provides GraphQL endpoint for managing Sitecore content and performing some custom authoring tasks, which previously one could only do with Sitecore user interface. And you can do them for almost any function. That means you can now automate operations around items, and that includes media items, templates, search, managing sites. But unfortunately, user management is not yet supported. I think it's coming in future versions. From what I heard, 10.4 is on roadmap, so maybe that will be the time they implement it. So Sitecore Forms, it's a feature used on almost every solution I used to work on, and therefore it's a pleasure to see a new embeddable forms framework. Using that framework, one can add Sitecore Forms to any web page, including the pages that are not running on Sitecore application. And that reminds me experience with Federated Experience Manager, which we did, as I remember, from version 8 so far. So the good news is that an embedded form support custom form elements, and they will not mess up with any existing styles on the page. It's also powered with Tailwind CSS framework. But in order to benefit from embeddable forms, you must have at least headless services 21. So they will give a feature to work with layout service and also the endpoint for data submission. There is a new data export tool that exports both contacts and interactions from the data database into the files. That's talking about XConnect. And it supports both Azure Blob and file storage providers to be used with your deployments, but it can also write into a network folder, which is helpful for local instances. Now that's interesting feature for database encryption. So at the storage level, transparent data encryption could be used with Microsoft SQL Server to protect critical data by using data at rest encryption. And in simple words, the data get encrypted prior to writing into databases, so that physical SQL tables contain already encrypted data. When you are read accessing that data, it gets transparently decrypted by authorized SQL users, so that your application gets decrypted. This feature significantly protects the information, and it also prevents data breaches. And what is more important, it complies with regulatory requirements for storing sensitive data. Very new, interesting feature that helps us to identify which database raised a published end and publish and remote events. It will simplify updating the cache on remote CD instances. I call it what raised the event, and basically there is the whole piece of documentation that describes how to use that. Speaking about Sitecore CLI, we had version 5 around for a while, and as I remember, since XM Cloud release. So now it comes to version 5.1.25, and it became also integral part of 10.3 platforms. Since now that CLI supports Linux-based environments and features publishing to Sitecore Edge. It also employs aggregated telemetry so that developers can make CLI even better. However, I can have some concerns using telemetry for security compliance for some governed environments. Just think about if you type in some sensitive information and it goes to telemetry, where it goes and how safe is that, and whether we can forcibly disable that option. So this is my question to Sitecore. So what are additional features we will see with 10.3 releases? Well, Headless Services 21 come into play. You may find a new starter kit for your new project on Next.js, which is 12.3. It works over React 18. Speaking about Sitecore Host, along with the components relying on each, such as publishing service and identity server, which now is version 7, they all were updated with .NET 6.0, which is now LTS version of this framework, and it has improved performance. Version of Solar has upgraded to 8.11.2. And those who are using XM, they may now benefit from auth authentication with third-party services for custom SMTP, which is also good. As Vasiliy previously said, Horizon unfortunately won't get any update beyond version 10.2, and technically it still works with 10.3 platforms. We tested it, it works, but there won't be any updates, and Sitecore officially discourages using it with 10.3 or later. Management Services 5.0, offering publishing to Experience Edge now. It's capable of publishing a single item, and there are some more improvements which I don't have listed. Search also got numerous improvements, namely improvements around searching by ID and path, and searching for non-quotes and closed terms now returns both exact and possible matches. There are also around 100 issues submitted by Sitecore customers, which were fixed and released with version 10.3. So today you can download, you can install 10.3 right now, and please feel free to do that. From my personal side, I can only give you a promise that Siphon tool, which I am in charge of, will sooner get upgrade to support version 10.3, and you'll be able to install it against any environment just in single click from graphical user interface. And basically, this is what I will be doing straight away after this event. Thank you. That's all.
Thanks, Martin. Quick question is from Kariga. Is 10.3 out on Docker yet? Images?
That's a good question. It should be on Docker, but basically what happened with 10.2, they promised support for Windows Server 2022, which never happened. then it was a scope for 10.3. However, they say it will come into play only in January. So in January, we will get support for Server 2022 for both 10.2 and 10.3. And by saying that, I assume the relevant container based images will be used. So I think as soon as they release that, they will be using new container images.
Also, Sitecore XM Cloud images are out for local development, and those may or may not be 10.3. Now, Sitecore XM Cloud behind the scenes is, for a lot of things, is the platform we're still used to. So, so if you saw my previous, I think, XM Cloud demo in the past, Sitecore user group, I showed there's the Launchpad is still there, desktop tool is still there, content editor is still there, you know, so the workbox, recycle, so all those things are still available. And so XM Cloud may or may not be 10.3.
No, it's not. You can see that from the versions dialog, and there is no feature parity between those two. Despite the development team, they try to make them as close to each other as possible. And the whole exercise of 10.3 is that it's a transition point from your existing headless solution to XM Cloud. Or, for example, it's a very good place to start a new solution or rebuild everything from scratch, already with the scope of migrating it in XM Cloud.
Yep. That's another thing. I've seen some diagrams for the path to XM Cloud. I think I've seen a couple of times where it just caught my attention that someone was asking to go to 10.3, upgrade to 10.3. 10.3. You don't have to. You know, switch to headless GraphQL implementation without having to go to 10.3. I mean, there are some additional features available, sure, but I wouldn't say that's a requirement. So, but I just keep an eye on those things. I've seen it in a couple of places. All right. Any questions on 10.3?
There's one question in chat. Does Sitecore wish for all customers to use Go SaaS offerings like XM Cloud and avoid self-hosting? We are getting mixed signals. In my opinion, between the lines, yes, they of course want everyone to use SaaS services, but there is nothing about that said explicitly, and you will unlikely hear that explicitly. They have XP platform. If you want to use that, you are welcome to use it, and it will get from today. It will get supported for 5 more years at least, and you probably can do extended support for 2 more years. So it will stay with us. Going to SaaS products in some way simplifies for them managing their clients, so they don't bother doing upgrades, because upgrades was the biggest pain for self-hosted environments. And I even gave earlier this year a speech about difficulties of doing Sitecore upgrades.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So Sitecore will, I mean, honestly, will never come out and say that they're going to deprecate XP, although all the signs are pointing to the SaaS story. And so a lot of Sitecore investments, the majority of Sitecore investments are focused on SaaS products, on the SaaS roadmap. However, at the same time, Sitecore does recognize that there are a lot of companies that can go SaaS for various reasons, right? From internal compliance, security, to all kinds of things. Some are justified, some are not. Whatever the reasons are, there's still a large number of companies that for one reason or another can't go to SaaS, right? So for those, Sitecore will continue supporting XP, and XP will be around for a long time. However, what I have personally seen in the past is with Sitecore investments going towards the SaaS platform, Sitecore's SaaS products will have more features, more developments happening in the future. I mean, this is again a hypothesis, right? So we don't have an official word from Sitecore, but this is purely based on personal experience, which will make it really attractive for a lot of customers to move to XM Cloud, right? So even if we take a look at 10.3, right, it took a year to release a minor version of the platform. 10.3, right? So when is 10.4 going to be out? You know, when are we going to see that one? So versions may also be going away. So we can already see the roadmap slowing down for the XP side of the house, right? But there's a lot of ramp up happening for the SaaS products. So, you know, take it for what it is. I mean, read between the lines. Sitecore is moving towards the SaaS direction. Will they discontinue the XP? Unlikely in the near future because of still a huge client base still running on XP. So it'll be around for a while. However, if you do plan to, you know, stay with the latest features and expand your capabilities, I would recommend start looking into the SaaS products.
If you want to read between the lines, in that case, you would read between the lines in your invoice. And that is the clear message that Sitecore sends to you. Compare the invoice for platform, which is self-hosted, and the, let's say, XM Cloud on average usage. And you will see which option is attractive. I think that way. But, you know, like it's a general trend globally, like everything is going SaaS. It's not just Sitecore. If you look widely, many vendors are just going SaaS simply because it simplifies managing things.
Commercial is the bottom line. Yeah. So there's actually there was a question on XM Cloud. Because XM Cloud, the price point is higher than regular XM, so there's a lot of confusion about that. Well, it's more expensive. If we actually count the total cost of ownership of the regular XM platform with infrastructure, with direct and indirect overhead, the maintenance, upgrades alone, gosh, for XP, I mean, you're looking at having to do an upgrade every 2.5 years at minimum if you want to stay up to date with the mainstream support. You can pay to extend, you know, to get the extended support. That comes with an extra cost, and the scope is limited. Not the place you want to be at. So all those things added in, XM Cloud is definitely an attractive option at the price point as well. I'm seeing a challenge paying for hosting to SaaS. Who is a customer who already paid for hosting services? So, customer of Microsoft paid for hosting services. So if you're already with Microsoft, I'm assuming you're talking about Azure. So you would still create additional. I mean, when you say prepaid hosting, unless Microsoft already gives you some kind of credit that you would use for hosting the infrastructure, you'd still have to pay for the infrastructure in the cloud. Is that what you mean?
Maybe the message was about the prepaid infrastructure well ahead, but that actually costs. So
the infrastructure. Yeah, there's a cost for compute power, everything that the infrastructure that we set up in the cloud.
The one thing I definitely know that people who are in charge of pricing, and especially pricing for XM Cloud, they do investigate all the aspects of cost of ownership for platforms, self-hosted and infrastructure, namely Asia, and they do all the best to make SaaS option more attractive compared to those.
Mm-hmm. Yep, a lot of things are going to be coming in. There's a big development center that was open in Greece. Sitecore's built out a huge R&D arm, so lots of effort is going into the SaaS product. So we'll see a lot of things coming out as these products will get stitched together.
Yeah, I remember when I was at MVP Summit, XM Cloud team, they actually showed us what they want to do as a phase next. I'm unfortunately under NDA, so I cannot disclose all that, but I was very much impressed. So they are really making this platform better.
Yeah. Question, China presence. Go ahead.
That's in addition to what you said about these source control providers. And this is like one from maybe a couple dozens of things they want to improve.
Definitely. Question about channel presence. Is that for XM Cloud? If so, I think that may be a limitation. I recently had a conversation about that. I don't think there's going by memory. I think that's one of the locations that's not available for XM Cloud just yet. However, unless you want the .cn domain, right? The Chinese domain. Remember, you're serving it from the edge, so you could get really close on regions to China and serve it from the CDN, right? Because you're serving your content from the CDN, so it's still faster than having a CD instance in that same location, right? Because you're still serving static. Let's say if we're talking Jamstack, for instance, right? You're serving static pages from the edge, the location near to China. It's still faster than generating dynamic pages, for instance, on the fly with MVC or so forth.
There's one more thing to mention is that in current implementation, XM Cloud is a single location.
Yep.
So basically, you select single region where you want it to be deployed to. I think it's temporal thing, but still we have it.
Yeah, China. Yeah, self-hosting, have a China agreement. Yep, you're probably right. China makes things fun. We just had to set up a delivery instance for one of our clients in China. I think you're on the right track there.
From my learning, China has Microsoft Azure services, but they are obviously totally disconnected from the rest of Microsoft infrastructure globally. So you have all that same technologies, but they are just limited to China. So you can still do self-hosted things. I'm not sure about containers, but I believe there should be one-to-one match, but it will be geographically in China.
Yeah, and you're dealing with third parties too. It's you don't get the general, I think, Azure, Microsoft. Awesome. All righty. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining. This was super interesting. Headless is definitely the future. 10.3 just came out, and Martin, 10 hours later, not even that, he already had a blog post out on it.
I shared the blog post into a chat, so please feel free to copy it.
There you go. What I'll do is I'm going to drop a link. I'll also drop a link to the video that I mentioned with Jason Sincere from Discover Sitecore channel on YouTube. By the way, if you're not subscribed, do subscribe. That's Sitecore's YouTube channel. It used to be called Sitecore Master. Now it's Discover Sitecore. And I also have to do this because we're getting into the holiday season. This is I've almost been waiting for that character to come back for Sitecore Santa. Check out his video after the Los Angeles user group. Pretty funny. If you haven't seen the first one, scroll down, watch the first one, and then watch the latest one at the top. So, but thanks everyone again for attending last Los Angeles Sitecore user group of 2022.